what is fintech, and is it new? And if so, what are some of the characteristics that you think make it new? And you don't have to agree that there is something new here. So maybe let's go the other directions. I'll start with Kristen again and get your take.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think yes, fintech is new, with the caveat that I think it's an overly used term, and that there are many people that are taking services and attaching a website to it and calling it fintech, and that's not really where the innovation is. Obviously I represent the blockchain industry, and from our perspective, we would argue that open public blockchains are absolutely a new innovation in the financial services space. I mean, for the first time, since I guess we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper, for the first time we have actual digital assets that can be moved around, that don't have to be backed by paper. And that is not an advance in, the computing power or anything of that nature. That's actually combining different technologies in a way that allows assets to be moved around, and those assets can be represented in many different ways. So yes, I think there are new things that are happening. The way that the open public blockchain systems work allow for a level of organization amongst unaffiliated participants in a way that was never possible before, because the right incentives weren't there. And I think we're really are truly still in the early stages of this, and that we're going to see a phenomenal amount of change and in some cases disruption in the years ahead.
Jackson, same question to you. Anything new?
So when we think about fintech, we like to sort of define it as the use of technology and the provision of financial products and services, right? And so I think if you use that very, very broad definition, basically anyone with a computer in their back office now is now a fintech firm, right? And we've heard that NASDAQ call themselves a fintech firm. We've heard Goldman Sachs call themselves a fintech firm. In fact, if you want to look back like 2,000 years to the creation of the abacus, you can even think about that as fintech, right? But I think there's something new about this era of fintech. Daniel, in his remarks on Lab CFTC, touched on a couple of things that I wanted to touch on, so I won't mention them. But I think there's a couple of things that are unique about this era of fintech, and that is the role that data plays in financial services in general these days, right? Everyone talks about big data. I always laugh when I hear that because it's great that you're amassing large amounts of data, but if you don't know how to use it, it's really not useful to you at the end of the day. So the application of advanced analytics, computing power, has been able to really open up a lot of these large unstandardized data sets that has allowed a lot of these companies to, one, start up pretty fast and pretty easily. I think if you looked at, you can agree with me or not on these statistics, but CB Insights, who some of you might be familiar with, basically said back in 2000 that the cost of starting up a company was $5 million. By 2011, it was down to $5,000, right? So if you have a bone to pick with those numbers, pick it with them, but nonetheless, an interesting example. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing a lot of guys, whether they be in the formal financial services system or whether they be outside of the financial service system, who are able to leverage that data and drive into various financial services sectors or broaden their horizon. So we think that the role of data is a huge enabler of today's fintech. And I'll just say one more thing as it relates to kind of the disintermediation, and Daniel talked a little bit about this, right? But we've had in the US at least regulations and policy really derived from the Great Depression, right? 1930s, 1940s, that's the underpinnings of a lot of our financial markets today. And here we are in the 21st century where we have massive computing power, the internet, mobile phones and technology, something that no one ever thought of in the 1930s and 40s, but that is increasingly what fintechs are coming up against, or just really innovative firms in general. So I just want to make that point as well.
Okay, Alex, your views. Anything new here?
I'm gonna try. These are all great points, and I agree with all of them. I think as investors, on the investment side, we try to differentiate between technology-enabled financial services and financial services-focused technology. You often see very different kind of multiples in the latter versus the former, and I think we try to sort of disaggregate, new ideas in the quote-unquote fintech space into those two broad categories to help us, understand a little bit better and get to the heart of the business models. But I think, strictly speaking, like, innovations in technology and financial services are not new per se. But what is new, and this gets to the points raised by Kristen and Jackson, is the density of the innovation and investment over the last, call it, five plus years. And I think there's a question of, well, why now? Why are we seeing that kind of increased density now? And I think it can be traced to a lot of the things that Jackson mentioned. We had obviously this significant financial crisis combined with large changes in regulation globally, and importantly, changes in consumer and small business and consumers broadly speaking of financial services, the preferences that they have vis-a-vis how they interact with financial institutions. The move to mobile, the move to cloud computing, the rapid expansion of the amount of data that's available has all kind of created a unique moment, in our opinion, a unique moment in history for innovation in financial services. And I think you've seen the investment kind of flow from that. So.
No, thank you. All excellent points. So Jackson, I'm going to come back to you. So we've talked a little bit high level, some of the attributes or characteristics of fintech, but you guys have been researching fintech innovation for a number of years. What are some of the key areas, substantive areas or verticals of fintech that you've been exploring? And then I'm interested, especially for this audience, have you seen any geographically meaningful distinctions in certain technologies being deployed in one country or one region versus another?
Sure, thanks, Daniel. Real quick, just to give you a kind of a really quick dive into the fintech program, there's really two planks to it, and one is informing and engaging the regulators on really how to find balance between supporting innovation, but at the same time ensuring that there are appropriate protections on the back end, right? And I think that fine line has been very difficult for a number of countries, including the U.S., to find. But nonetheless, you all are working very hard at trying to find that line. And frankly, our work over the last couple of years has tried to help regulators, policymakers, and just industry stakeholders in general really understand what's going on in this space and help in order to help them find that fine line. The second plank to our program is really what's the actual impact of fintech, right? We talk about fintech constantly now. There's conferences, I think, on an everyday basis talking about how great the technology is. But frankly, as interested as we are in the technology itself, what's the actual impact from that technology? How are companies leveraging that technology to really drive change across three buckets that we're very interested in, and that's financial inclusion, access to capital, and then transparency and compliance. So over the 4 years, which actually feels like 40, that I've been involved in the fintech space, what's been pretty interesting is we originally focused on the payments and lending side of things, and that's because from 2015 on, a lot of U.S. policymakers and regulators really got interested in this space. If you guys were following some of the VC trends, a lot of money poured into these companies, whether they be in Silicon Valley, New York, or Chicago, any other couple of the hot spots. We focused on that domestically, but nonetheless, we are cognizant of what's going on abroad. Frankly, I think we have a couple hundred in the United States. I think China has somewhere close to 3,000 peer-to-peer lenders. But we're also interested beyond just the lending side of things, also payments activity. So how is the mobile phone now being used to help serve people that were, that are untouched